Christopher Johnson McCandless is probably the most controversial survivalist who has ever lived. His journey into the Alaskan bush is possibly the most covered expedition into previously mapped territory, and Into the Wild is an international bestseller and is used in curriculum across the United States. So what is the story that has captivated so many? Well, after graduating university, Chris McCandless changed his name, donated his college fund, and went on a solo expedition across the United States. He later ditched his car, abandoning most of his possessions and burning his cash. He tramped across the western United States for a few months, but his end goal was always Alaska. To Chris, now known as Alex, Alaska was the wild, the final frontier, and his journey to self-discovery. While Chris was tramping the West, he met many people, all of which he would have a strong effect on. Almost everyone he met would remember him. Everyone who developed a close friendship with Chris would hear about his future plans for Alaska. I thought Chris was out of his mind when he told us about his Great Alaskan Odyssey, as he called it, but he was really excited about it. Couldn't stop talking about the trip. Tracy Burrs. 1 month before Chris was set to depart on his journey, he started work with one Wayne Westberg in Carthage, South Dakota. This time period gives us a good idea of what Chris felt going into his adventure. Right before he departed to Alaska, Chris had a party at the bar with Westberg's crew. This Alaskan Odyssey was a big deal to Chris. Nothing was going to stop him. On April 28, 1992, Chris was dropped off at the Stampede Trail. This was the beginning of his Great Alaskan Odyssey. On April 29th, Chris made it to the Teklenika River, where he was forced to wade across, and by May 1st, Chris has made his way up the trail far enough to find Fairbanks 142, the bus that would become his home. In the bus, he wrote of the divinity of tramping next to the many signatures of people who had spent a night or so. 2 years he walks the earth. No phone, no pool, no pets, no cigarettes. Ultimate freedom. An extremist, an aesthetic voyager whose home is the road. Escaped from Atlanta, thou shalt not return, because the West is the best. And now, after 2 rambling years, comes the final and greatest adventures. The climactic battle to kill the false being within and victoriously conclude the spiritual revolution. 10 days and nights of freight trains and hitchhiking bring him to the great white north, no longer poisoned by the civilization he flees, and walks upon the land to become lost in the wild. On September 6th, 1992, Chris's decomposed body was found inside of the bus. So what caused Chris to venture into the Alaskan bush so hazardously? Well, as I've mentioned before, Chris wanted to venture into Alaska and live off the land ever since he departed Atlanta. His main inspiration for traveling into Alaska was famous American author Jack London. Jack London was an author who lived during the late 1800s. Chris was very inspired by his works, especially Call of the Wild, White Fang, An Odyssey of the North, and his short story, To Build a Fire. London's works were largely based off his trip to Alaska during the Klondike Gold Rush. However, Jack London wasn't the only reason Chris felt so compelled to travel to Alaska. Chris was on a journey to self-discovery. Escaping modern society and returning to the wild was a moral calling to Chris. Unfortunately, the way that he needed to return to the wild caused many problems, possibly problems that led to his demise. Many have called Chris arrogant and self-centered, especially Alaskans, who describe Chris as a reckless, incompetent idiot. So what did he do to earn such titles? Well, he's definitely had his fair share of flaws that got in the way of his journey. Chris would have had much better chances of survival if he was less narcissistic. For an example, Chris never got help from others and frequently found it insulting to receive gifts or money, even from his friends. Chris also went into the journey without any exit strategies. For Chris, if there wasn't enough danger, his journey would be artificial or manufactured. Chris also went in with outdated maps and poor equipment. Just because you have a life goal doesn't mean you have to go to such extreme measures. Something caused the nihilism present in Chris when he left for Alaska with no backup plan, no way out, and nobody to rely on if he couldn't make it back. The most probable cause for his nihilism was the tension that he had with his father. Although Chris's relationship with his father wasn't perfect, it was still very stable until his senior year in high school. Chris made a discovery that would permanently damage his relationship with his parents. Chris was on a solo trip to the west and visiting his hometown of El Segundo. He was talking to childhood friends and he found out that his father continued his relationship with his estranged wife after falling in love with Billy, Chris's mother. He spent time with both families until his double life was revealed, forcing Chris, Walt, Chris's father, and Billy to move east. When Chris finally returned from the West, he didn't confront his parents about this newfound information and was left without closure, left to draw his own conclusions. Resentment takes time to build, and perhaps if Chris went to somebody else to talk about his issues before they consumed him, maybe something could have been done, something that could have prevented Chris from going to Alaska without any backup. Unfortunately, Chris's resentment built and built. During his sophomore year of college, old friends noticed that Chris was different, and the following summer, Chris's relationship with his parents began to fall apart. Immediately after graduation, Chris finally cut communications completely with his parents and embarked on his final journey. During high school, Chris was nearly a straight-A student and the captain of the cross-country team. During college, he took a particular interest in the apartheid in South Africa and how it absolutely needed to end. He was known to go around and feed the homeless in his local area with a very hands-on approach. Instead of donating food through an organization, he would drive around on Friday nights and offer food himself. He was radically against certain elements of capitalism, particularly those that caused corruption, and he was planning on pursuing Harvard Law School after university. So all this leads to the question, what could he do if he were alive today? What would he have done if he confronted his parents about their past or simply got help with his problems? Well, instead, he put so much pressure on himself to solve his problems, and he ended up solving them by ditching his whole life altogether. We might live in a different world today if he seeked help from other people instead of putting too much pressure on himself.